People who have adult children that don't talk to you, why do you think that is? Story 1. There's a woman at church, and every week she asks for prayers during prayer requests. At first, I thought it was kind of cute, but it's over a year later, and she always asks for prayers so that her children will speak with her again. She claims to have been the best mother, and one by one, all 3 of her adult children, and thus her grandchildren, stopped speaking with her. But she did everything right. She fed them, she clothed them, she put them through school, which to me sounds like the bare minimum that you're supposed to do as a parent, and not everything. But okay. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, but then every week, another piece of the puzzle would come out. She tried calling, but her numbers were blocked. She tried to find them on social media, but she's blocked. How strange. She says she was such an excellent mother. Why would they block her? She tried reaching out again and received a handwritten letter on why she should never contact them again. But we never heard the contents of the letter. We were just supposed to pity her and have sympathy and assume that these entire separate groups of people were evil and were doing her emotional harm. I got to know her, and she is an abusive narcissist and nothing short of pure evil. All the red flags you'd expect are there. But every week, it's pray to Jeebus for me, everybody. My evil, ungrateful children, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to hope she's just clueless, but I understand she is sick and probably doesn't know how horrible she really is. I feel very, very bad for her kids, but very happy they were strong enough to break away from that hot mess. It almost brings me physical pain now when she asks for prayers that her kids will talk to her again, because I know all she wants to do is resume hurting them. Story 2. From the other parent's perspective, my adult children, 25 and 23, do not communicate with their father at all. Long story short, he remarried about a week after our divorce was final, and he and his new wife went on to have children of their own. Over time, his visits with the children became more infrequent and stressful due to his wife's distaste for me and my children. He has had no contact with the kids in over 3 years, and his previous attempt was 4 years before that. My youngest says he will never forgive his father for replacing all of us with a new family and forgetting us. The oldest says it's just not worth chasing someone who has no interest. Personally, I'm sad and angry on their behalf. He divorced me, not them. I can't reply to everyone, but I want to say the amount of people who say they've experienced the same issue astounds me and breaks my heart. I just do not understand a parent who can walk away from their children. Even when it's been hard and I've had to be both mom and dad, I wouldn't trade my kids for anything. Story 3. My son hasn't spoken to me in over 10 years. He had behavioral issues as a teen. I took him to a doctor after doctor to get him help. He ended up in a partial hospitalization program. He had them fooled for weeks that there was nothing wrong with him. But one day, it all came crashing down. After that, he deteriorated quickly in that program. We had come to the point where he was either going to full hospitalization, a boys' school for troubled teens, Stormlong second chance for boys 'cause they deserve it, or he was going to be arrested for assault. His father, whom he only saw maybe twice a year, didn't want that, and said he wanted to take custody of him. The program would only let that happen if my son was enrolled in a comparable program with his father. Father said, of course. Didn't happen. My son grew up and was a terror to his father and had little to no contact with me. He got arrested a few times. After one particularly bad fight with his father, he got kicked out. After a few months, my son contacted me on Mother's Day. He told me he was in the Marines and was done with basic training and was going to be given an assignment soon. I'll never forget how proud I felt of my son then. Shortly after, I got contacted by the Marines, asking if I knew where my son was. He went AWOL the day after Mother's Day. After a few years without contact, he contacted me again, said he was doing much better and wanted to visit me. I said yes. I should have known when I had to pay for his bus ticket that he wasn't better. He stayed with me for a few days, and I thought all was well. Not so much. 2 days after he left, I got a call from my credit card company. He He stole my card and put $1,600 of airsoft pistols on it. I was given the choice to pay it or call it fraud, in which case the credit card company would press charges. I called it fraud. I haven't seen him since. I'm still his friend on Facebook and have seen that he poses as a wounded Iraq vet. That is disgusting and shows me he hasn't changed at all. That's why I don't talk to him. Story 4. Not too far off from my dad, but he'd join in the beatings. Part out of fear of drawing her ire, he almost never exhibited signs of having a backbone unless he could physically overpower someone. And part because I think the only way he knew how to deal with kids was yelling at them or beating them, because that's just what you did in the 50s when he was a kid. He did have moments where he defied my mother, though, so as an adult, he was the only parent I wanted anything to do with. Until he showed signs of being a racist, followed by me playing dumb until he explained in plain English that he was, in fact, being racist. After that, I'd only interact with him if forced into the same room. He didn't get vaccinated and was killed by COVID last spring, long after vaccinations came out. Didn't go to his funeral. Can only make assumptions about which town he's buried in. Haven't shed a tear for him. So, yeah, as an adult child, we'll remember the bad the less bad parent did. But if you tried at least a little bit in some impactful way, for me, by the way, it was 2 things. 1, my dad giving up his own breakfast when I was somewhere between 8 and 10 because he'd been watching my mother starve me for days. And 2, he realized his decades of messing up when she basically left him to die while he was having a stroke. You have to be an irredeemable piece of doo-doo on your own to get the full NC treatment, no contact. Story 5. My mother, who was a psych doctor, started having an affair with an ex-high school friend of mine we bailed out of jail. During the affair, they started drugging Dad's vodka with Ativan to make him pass out. I caught them. I went to the police to report this. They contacted my mother, who was a psych doctor, and the police took me away for evaluation and held me in a psychiatric facility. I was held against my will for delusions and threats of violence. Anyways, they held me until Dad collapsed and broke 7 ribs and tore some ligaments in the fall. I begged the people in the psych ward to make an inquiry with his doctor to do a toxicology report and that he will have unprescribed Ativan in his system. Sure enough, he was drugged. I was right. I got released from the psych ward the next morning. The nurses and doctors were like, his story was real. So I threw my mom and her new boyfriend out, got Dad sober. Now Mom ran away with her boyfriend, then later found out he beat her to within an inch of life. But Mom has regressed to being a scared child and won't press charges because she's afraid he will come back. Story 6. I'm lucky. Both my adult children call me multiple times a week. But my ex, their father, complains that our daughter rarely calls him. I've told him many, many times that if he wants her to call more often, he needs to listen to her. He's a pretty narcissistic dude who only wants to talk, and if he takes a breath and you try to jump into the conversation, he either gets louder to drown you out or he goes dead silent, clearly in his waiting until you shut up so I can talk mode. He never asks questions or expresses any interest in their lives. My son puts up with it because he can direct some of the conversation by bringing up sports or interesting historical stuff or books or whatever, and then they can have somewhat of a discourse, although listening to the inevitable droning lecture is always included. My daughter has little patience for that, so she rarely calls him. Even after I told him what he should try, he ignored me, which is what he did for nearly the entirety of our marriage. He still periodically bemoans the fact that she doesn't call. Long story short, some kids don't call because their parents aren't listening to them. Story 7. My father would say that my mother lied and manipulated us into taking her side during the divorce. The truth is that he boasted to me about pulling a gun on her to teach her a lesson, and then didn't understand why I thought that was unacceptable. I haven't spoken to him in a decade since that discussion. To this day, I believe he was contemplating murder, suicide, or family annihilation. If you ask my mother-in-law why both her sons moved in with their dad when they were around 12, she'd say their dad manipulated them against me. I did nothing wrong. But it turns out they just liked being with Dad more because they didn't have to raise their baby sister for their mom, and he didn't abuse them. Abusers never believe it's them. Story 8. My brother was the first of us to have kids. My grandfather was about 90 and pretty close to death. We were at my brother and sister-in-law's house for a barbecue, and while sitting around a fire, drinking beer and roasting marshmallows, this witch turns to me and says, "Do you think Grandpa will give me a bigger inheritance because we have kids now?" I was speechless. Grandpa ain't giving you crap, tits. The inheritance is my brother's. Having been privy to the contents of the will because my dad asked for my advice years ago, Dad helped Grandpa with the will along with their attorney, I knew that the only people named in the will were his kids and grandkids. Spouses of his kids, spouses of grandkids, and great-grandchildren were not named at all. The split was very simple, 30% for his kids and 10% for each of his 4 grandkids. I never looked at my sister-in-law the same ever again. Just a money-grubbing butthole. Story 9. My daughter went through a traumatic event where she found out her mom was having an affair with a junkie. Daughter was furious at her mom for destroying the family. Mom flipped out, threatened seppuku to our daughter's face, blaming her. At the moment, everything shifted, and daughter became the nurturer to her mom, who regressed into childhood. A complete switching of roles when my daughter really needed a mom. Mom wasn't safe to be angry at, for fear she'd kill herself, so I became the target. We talk, but it's so terse and superficial that it's close to non-communication. I'd like to talk through what happened, even in a therapeutic setting, but my daughter says that's off the table. Story 10. Parents. It's because I fricked up and neglected the relationship. I wasn't the father she deserved. It's that simple. I'm going to pretend my dad wrote this and accept that him ignoring me, my daughter, my husband, and our life we've made is really that simple. He neglected the relationship. He's not the father I deserve. Story 11. My mom had a falling out with her sisters when their mother died almost 40 years ago, and they're still pretty much not on speaking terms. Her 2 sisters tried to screw her out of her share of my mom's things, and they tried to screw her out of her inheritance again when their dad died a few years later. It was toxic enough that my mom can count on one hand the number of times she's spoken to her older sister over the last 3 decades. One of my aunts tried to organize something of a sisters reunion this past summer, and my mom basically told them to step off. She has zero interest in burying the hatchet with her 2 sisters, though she is on better terms with her half-sister who lives in Europe and who was not involved in trying to cheat her out of her inheritance all those years ago. Story 12. I grew up in a retirement community. What I've noticed is that it's due to a few things. The parent is intolerant of their child's life choices. That can be everything from drugs, religion, politics, racist ideology, parents, who their kids married, etc. Sometimes it's the parent's unpleasant personality, from either some personality disorder or just plain being a jerkwad. Some kids usually stay away because they feel they've disappointed their parents and are hiding their life from them. The majority of the issue is usually due to an unpleasant parent. Story 13. My mother told me 3 weeks after I lost my father and best friend at 14 that he has told her on his deathbed that adopting me was his greatest mistake. It stuck with me my whole life. I'm 38 now and know it wasn't true, but that narcissistic witch can rot in hell. When my dad died, my sister didn't want to share his inheritance the way I thought was fair. She has 2 kids. I had none at the time. She told me he loved her and the kids more than me anyways. I'll never forget. I have the screenshot, and it made me speechless. Story 14. I have 4 kids. My 2 oldest aren't living with me. My oldest daughter talks to me some. My oldest son wishes me dead. I made many, many mistakes when my kids came back to live with me. Ex-wife lost custody. My eldest hated my long-term relationship girlfriend. My daughter was right. She was terrible, and consequently, so was I. My daughter left to go back with her mother as she was not doing well here. I understand now why. My long-term relationship girlfriend made my eldest son's life miserable too. During that time, I broke up with the long-term relationship girlfriend. It was too late. My eldest son left to go be with his mother and sister. I'm sure that my ex-wife is not helping this matter, but he's mad at me, and I know I made some pretty bad decisions. I've accepted the fact that I may never have a relationship with him ever again. Story 15. My mom has her estate going to Deaf Dogs of America before me. My mom did it just to spite me. That being said, she did give my deceased father's brother, my uncle, the first beneficiary status, but he has stated he wants nothing to do with it. So if he declines, it goes to Deaf Dogs of America, and if he takes it and gives it to me, we will both have tax implications up the wazoo. I informed her, and she just smiled and said, "That's what I deserve." Her blood family barely converses with her due to her trying to claim money from my grandmother's estate that was supposed to be split between the kids. It's tragic. She has that much hatred, disdain, and resentment for me, but she's just extremely emotionally immature, unfortunately. Story 16. I know of a distant family cousin whose parents fired him from their very successful family business because he refused to take his wife and children to their church and worship the way they did. In retaliation, he and his wife refused to allow his parents to see the grandchildren. They sued. They lost. They never were able to see their grandchildren and eventually died. He ended up with the business anyway by default, not by the will. They lost decades of grandchildren just by being stubborn. Nobody in the family had anything to do with them the last 35 years of their lives, and they were miserable. Screw them. Parents, if you screw over your children, don't expect to ever have your grandchildren. Story 17. I am very careful with advice that I give to my adult son for fear that he's going to stop talking to me. In my opinion, the kid is making some decisions in his personal life and work life that I don't agree with or have concerns about, decisions that I would not make based on experience or my personal views. I'm biting my tongue to not say anything. I don't want to be a nagging parent because he's an adult and needs to make his own way. I will give advice when asked, but I've stopped giving out-of-the-blue opinions. I saved that for my high school teens still at home. Hee 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 hee. Story 18. I had a patient, she has since passed, RIP, who didn't talk to her youngest daughter. We were very close, saw her 3 times a week, so I asked her why she thought her daughter distanced herself away from her. She simply said that they were too alike and they butted heads, even over little things. She did admit that since they distanced themselves from each other, she has had more peace, and she thinks her daughter does too. Not sure if her daughter went to her funeral, although in my head, I'm hoping she did. She died from COVID. Story 19. I know this wasn't the point of this post, but I'm a grown child. 5 years ago, on Thanksgiving no less, my mother told me my wife and I are bad parents because our daughter is an only child. Then followed it up by saying my wife graduated from a terrible high school. Not sure where that came from. She then topped it off with an ugly, racist remark about my white sister-in-law being married to a black man. Lastly, she said I was not allowed to tell my wife any of this. That lasted about 45 seconds, and that was the end of that. Story 20. My dad gave an ultimatum as well. Talk to me, or I'm taking you out of the will. I wasn't going to be threatened like that, and we haven't spoken since. That was a lose-lose for me. Accept the money, and then that's the only reason I came back, making me a butthole. Don't come back and talk to family. I'm still the butthole. Story 21. My children are low contact. I feel it's fair. Their mother has bipolar disorder. She was violent and abusive. She's gotten help, but she still hurts them. I did not protect them. Them not being around me is justified. They should be angry. We messed up. They didn't do anything wrong, and they need to heal as they see fit. Kids not being around their parents have valid reasons. Most people just can't accept it. Story 22. I'm a parent of a child who does still talk to me, but rarely, and I fully accept that it is my fault. I was an immature parent and made some bad decisions in addition to being inconsistent with my parenting due to immaturity. I'm also on the spectrum, but that's something I didn't find out until a few years ago when my son was diagnosed. I know I wasn't great, and I understand my daughter, and I try to give her space. Story 23. I was very deep in resolving my own trauma when my kids were growing up. I was often distant and emotionally unavailable. I wasn't the parent they deserved. It is the greatest sorrow of my life. I did to my kids what my mom did to me. I can't be sorry enough. Story 24. Child of parents I didn't talk to, and a parent of a child who doesn't speak to me. It's a lot of mental health issues. Didn't break the cycle. That stuff is on me. I'm better now, although my parents have both passed. There may be a reconciliation with my child, but I doubt it. Story 25. When my parents died, we found a chalkboard in their attic where my mom had written, "Why do my children hate me?" She never knew. For the record, killing and cooking my pet didn't help her cause. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.